The Ottoman Empire didn't simply collapse under the weight of history, a slow, inevitable decline. It was deliberately pushed, shoved into the abyss of the First World War by a secret treaty signed in the dead of night by a radical faction within its own government. A pact so clandestine, so ruthlessly executed, it orchestrated the empire's final, irreversible undoing. Today, we are going to expose the true architects of its destruction, the Young Turks, whose ambition and ruthless internal power struggles ignited a conflict that irrevocably reshaped the Middle East and the world as we know it. For generations, the standard narrative of the Ottoman Empire's demise has been one of gradual decay. It was the sick man of Europe, a once glorious 6-century-old entity stretching across 3 continents, but by the early 1900s, it was supposedly a shadow of its former self. Most history books paint a picture of an empire struggling to modernize, caught between the great powers of Europe, ultimately succumbing to forces beyond its control. It's a story of an ancient regime unable to keep pace with industrialization, losing its peripheral territories, and finally being dragged unwillingly into the global catastrophe of the First World War. You've likely heard about the sweeping reforms of the Tanzimat era in the 19th century, attempts to centralize power and modernize the military and administration. You've learned about the rise of nationalism among its diverse peoples, Arabs, Armenians, Greeks, Kurds, each yearning for self-determination, further chipping away at the empire's unity. Historians like Stanford J. Shaw, in his extensive volumes on Ottoman history, meticulously document the slow erosion of central authority, the decline of military power, and the significant territorial losses in the Balkans and North Africa leading up to the 20th century. The common understanding focuses on the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, a movement promising a revitalized constitutional empire. This revolutionary fervor, we are often told, was a genuine attempt to save the empire, to inject new life into its ailing body. But consider the devastating impact of the Balkan Wars in 1912 and 1913. The empire lost nearly all its remaining European territories, a massive blow to its prestige and its multi-ethnic identity. Tens of thousands of Ottoman Muslims were expelled from their ancestral lands, creating a profound refugee crisis and fueling a virulent sense of betrayal and vulnerability within the empire. This catastrophe, often framed as simply another sign of decline, actually acted as a powerful catalyst, driving a segment of the Young Turk leadership towards increasingly radical and militaristic solutions. But what if that revolution, particularly its radical elements, far from saving the empire, actually sealed its doom? What if the empire's entry into the most devastating conflict the world had ever seen wasn't an unfortunate inevitability, a last desperate throw of the dice by a dying power? What if it was a calculated, clandestine maneuver by those very reformers, a faction driven not by survival, but by an aggressive, expansionist ideology? It changes everything, doesn't it? The truth, long obscured and buried deep within the diplomatic archives of Berlin and Istanbul, reveals a far more intricate and sinister plot. On August 2, 1914, a mere 2 days after Germany declared war on Russia, a secret treaty of alliance was signed between the Ottoman Empire and Imperial Germany. This was not the act of the entire Ottoman government. It was the audacious, underhanded work of a select few. This was the project of Enver Pasha, the ambitious and highly influential Minister of War, along with Minister of Interior Talat Pasha and Minister of Marine Jamal Pasha, the dominant triumvirate of the Committee of Union and Progress, better known as the Young Turks. Imagine the scene. Europe is erupting into the most violent conflict humanity had ever witnessed. The world holds its breath in terror, and in the hushed, secret corridors of the Ottoman capital, these men are making a pact that will decide the fate of millions, without the full knowledge or even the consent of their own sultan or many of the cabinet ministers. The secrecy of this agreement, a profound act of duplicity against their own state, is absolutely staggering. Historian Ulrich Trumpener, in his meticulously researched Germany and the Ottoman Empire, 1914-1918, details how this alliance was largely Enver Pasha's personal vision. He was a charismatic, German-educated officer, deeply impressed by German military efficiency and consumed by a fervent desire to modernize the Ottoman army, reverse territorial losses, and forge a new, expansive Turkic empire stretching into Central Asia. This wasn't about simply defending the homeland. This was about aggressive expansion, a radical pan-Turkist vision that saw Germany not as an ally of equals, but as a powerful temporary tool to achieve their grandiose aspirations. They were willing to gamble the entire empire for this dream. The treaty itself was an offensive and defensive alliance, committing the Ottomans to enter the war on Germany's side should Russia declare war on Germany. But the timing and execution were critical. The Ottoman cabinet was deeply divided, with many, including the Grand Vizier Said Halim Pasha, favoring neutrality. So, how did Enver Pasha force their hand? He manufactured a crisis. The pretext for Ottoman entry into the war came with the infamous Göheben and Breslau incident. These two formidable German battle cruisers, pursued by the British fleet in the Mediterranean, sought refuge in Ottoman waters. Under international law, they should have been disarmed and interned. Instead, Enver Pasha, without official government approval, engineered their sale to the Ottoman navy, ostensibly for a symbolic payment of 80 million marks, a ludicrous sum for ships on the run. The German crews remained on board, simply donned fez hats, and the ships were renamed the Yavuz Sultan Selim and Midilli. This brazen act, a clear and undeniable breach of neutrality, was a direct provocation. It provided the casus belli for Russia, Britain, and France. The Ottoman Empire was not dragged unwillingly into the war. It charged headfirst into it, pushed by the ambitions of a few powerful, reckless men who believed they could manipulate the unfolding global conflict to their own advantage. It was a truly astonishing maneuver. The consequences of this secret pact were nothing short of catastrophic, not only for the Ottoman Empire itself, but for the entire geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, the tremors of which we feel to this very day. This deliberate plunge into World War I, far from revitalizing the empire as Enver Pasha and his colleagues had so arrogantly hoped, instead exposed its deep structural weaknesses and overstretched its already strained resources beyond repair. The Ottoman front lines, from the brutal deserts of Mesopotamia to the rugged mountains of the Caucasus, from the sands of Sinai to the treacherous cliffs of Gallipoli, became battlegrounds where hundreds of thousands perished and where the empire's remaining strength was bled dry. This was not merely a European war, it became a truly global conflict with the Ottoman Empire at its bleeding heart, a fact often overlooked in Western historical narratives focused in the Western Front. Consider the sheer human cost and the long-term impact. The war facilitated the devastating Armenian deportations and massacres, a tragic chapter in history that continues to cast a long, dark shadow. It directly led to the Arab Revolt, further fracturing imperial unity, driven by promises of independence from the British that would ultimately be betrayed. Historian Eric Zurcher, whose foundational work, Turkey, A Modern History, provides invaluable insights, highlights how the war accelerated the internal collapse, leading to a desperate scramble for influence among the victorious Allied powers. The infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement, signed between Britain and France in 1916, carving up anticipated Ottoman territories even before the war was over, was a direct and undeniable response to the Ottoman decision to enter the conflict on the side of the Central Powers. This secret treaty, the very one we are discussing today, essentially wrote the death warrant for a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire that had endured for an astonishing 600 years. The modern borders of Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and even Israel are all direct descendants of this imperial dismantling, a process irrevocably initiated by the Young Turks' fatal gamble. Their decision, made in secrecy, fundamentally altered the course of history for an entire region, creating a legacy of instability and artificial divisions that continues to fuel conflicts and define identities a century later. You will never look at the collapse of the Ottoman Empire the same way again. No longer a tragic but understandable victim of overwhelming circumstances, but rather a colossal historical tragedy born from the reckless ambition of an internal faction. You now see not just the end of an empire, but the terrifying consequences when a small, determined group seizes power, ignores dissent, and sacrifices the future of millions for its own radical, unproven vision. It's a chilling reminder of how the hidden machinations of a few can rewrite the destiny of an entire civilization, leaving a legacy of geopolitical instability that resonates to this very day. The true story of the Ottoman Empire's end isn't just a tale of imperial decline. It's a stark warning about the power of hidden agendas, secret pacts, and the devastating impact of internal political struggles on the grand stage of world events. And it's only by uncovering these buried truths that we truly begin to understand the complex, often brutal forces that have shaped our world. Join us next time as we peel back another layer of accepted history, revealing even more astonishing truths from the archives that will fundamentally shift your understanding of the past.